I'll just leave that there.
Okay, here. I don't need to put your slideshow through anything. So
kind of step to one side probably, so I can see the screen.
Yeah.
This is a lot more people than I expected. Now I'm kind of nervous.
You're fine.
I'm joking.
Okay.
It's the stage, right? Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is a great turnout. I really appreciate it. I want to thank the college, the foundation, for this opportunity. I want to thank Alyssa and Rich, wherever Rich is.
I think he's up front still ushering people back here.
You guys did a phenomenal job installing this.
Well, thank you for letting us. Like, yeah. I'm so excited that, you know, we got to show some pieces that weren't over at Fort Hays.
Yes.
So that's exciting that like it's not just a exact repeat. And then also, like, you're an amazing artist and you're an instructor here. That's pretty exciting. So
also, I want to thank Bambi, my wife, Henley, my son. Without you two, I don't think any of this would have been possible. Your guys' support through the whole MFA process has been phenomenal. I mean, I appreciate it. I love you guys. So, Terra Et Intus, Latin, the earthen within us. Before I launch into the slideshow, I'll give you a little bit of a precursor. So I was an artist, working for an artist who's actually here. Where is she? Carol's in the back. Working as a potter, making pots, a husband, a father, and then decided to re-enter academia and started teaching college. I actually started at Pratt Community College in 2019, and so in order to teach college, I had to get my Master's of Fine Arts degree to keep the job. So wrap your head around all that. Like, I had all of the responsibilities, because as an artist, you're always booked out, usually a year in advance on shows and festivals and everything else. And then on top of it, just being a husband and a dad and teaching full-time, and oh yeah, I'm going to go back and get a master's degree in art. So needless to say, sleep was extremely underrated. I didn't sleep a lot in the beginning. Basically, when I started as a potter, I knew pretty much right off the bat, I understood pots, and I had lots of discussions with my instructors. Linda Ganstrom, my professor of ceramics, was phenomenal, and she pretty much kind of coaxed me, you know, in a roundabout way, telling me pots are great, you're good at it, but you need to start thinking beyond the pot. So very first semester, you can see in the corners, these are some pots that I started with, and I was really looking at a lot of, these were just microscopic amoebas. And I think both, I don't remember what they were scientifically, but both of them caused some really gnarly health effects. And so I was experimenting with sgraffito. Like, she basically told me, do what you know, but grow a little. Try something different that you've been interested in. So sgraffito, I was coating the pots with underglaze or colored slip, and then etching through, doing the line work. And I started with some geometric stuff, and I quickly realized that wasn't for me. And I really liked this sort of organic feel, and I realized almost immediately that by making it on a pot, I was setting borders. I was boxing myself in and giving myself boundaries from the beginning that couldn't grow beyond that. And so she, you know, I hate to say it, but she was right. I had to move beyond the pot. By the way, I started in 2019. Let that sink in. So I got one semester of normal teaching and normal master's degree classes, and then the virus that shall not be named, because we don't want to hear that word anymore, struck. But what was interesting was in 2019, it was all over the media and it wasn't really here yet, and I was getting these electron microscope images that were always flashing on the TV, and I was like, I could do something with that. And I was already interested in microscopic stuff and decided I was going to go beyond the pot. And so that's what you're seeing here, and these are actually in this room over here. This one has little tiny drawings of the images, and I also found out something really fun. Electron microscope images are always black and white, and so anytime you see the images in the news of something, they actually hired an artist to render their interpretation of electron microscopy. So these are some of the early inspiration. Once I started down that path, it was kind of never ending. So we've got moth eggs, all sorts of insect eggs. This is actually a scabies mite, and you will see a representation of that in the other room. This is a petri dish image. We've got coral, fungi. This is a stone formation from Lake Wilson. I'm inspired by all of it, you know, just everything in nature. And I love looking at everything on a microscopic level, to the point that I would make an interpretation of something and then look at that under a microscope after it's been fired and then make another interpretation of that. So all of the work here is kind of a conglomerate of multiple things. So when you look at something and you think, oh, this looks like it could be ocean life, this looks like it could be a fungus, it's all inspired by all of it, basically. So take from it what you will, but here's some of the images. That scabies mite, I had a discussion with my sculpture professor at Fort Hays, and it was a discussion about how the scabies mite is microscopic, and no one really understands how disgusting and creepy they are. And then it was, imagine if it was a 5-pound mite. And then we had a whole discussion of like, oh God, imagine if that thing bit you. And so then the moth eggs, I love spending time in nature, and it was just a really good excuse to go to the lake or go hunting or fishing or go cutting firewood or just walking in the woods with my son, to have research and to find a way to tie that back in. So one of the things that I would do when I was out in the woods, I was always looking for something that I could bring back home and tie in with my sculpture. And Henley really got involved with it, which will come up a little bit later for the next big aha moment, the next big inspiration. But for these, when I was out in the woods, I was looking for specific types of wood, knowing I was going to cut them as bases for these sculptures. I was looking for certain grain patterns, and I played around with like really perfect geometric shapes versus kind of loose geometric shapes. I did some organic shapes. I don't know if there's any of the more organic ones here. Then I torched them to really accentuate the wood grain pattern. And going back to the geological formations, this was another series that started. I guess I should mention, if you view the show, if you start in this pot over here, this is the earliest stuff. When I stepped out of the realm of pottery, that's that pot over here. And then if you work your way to this pot over here, that's the next step. That's where you'll find these. These were all a reference to all the geologic formations that I was seeing. And then I'd spend time in the studio trying to recreate everything that I saw. And it took time for me to realize almost everything in nature happens from like some violent event, whether it's flooding, volcano, earthquake. For the really cool stuff that I was really interested in, it didn't make sense to me to spend days in the studio trying to sculpt that. It just didn't translate as well. And so then I started using violent forces to shape the clay. So there were firecrackers. Most of them are just shot with a rifle. And so in Latin, the translation on those is violent forces, and then they're just numbered, Latin numerals. Then I started to play around with the glazing, because I've always been kind of a mad scientist when it comes to glaze chemistry. And so these really sparked that. And I think there's an image coming up, of some of the glaze tests that started in my thesis work. And I was basically just looking at what I was seeing in nature and then wondering, can I make that happen? Like, can I formulate a glaze that simulates the effects that I'm seeing? And these were kind of a part of that too, but these obviously weren't shot up. These were actually formed in the studio. This was a big aha moment for me. While I was teaching at Pratt Community College, the biology professor there, for whatever reason, he found out about the work that I was making, and he invited me over to the biology room, and he actually gave me a microscope. And while I was there, I got to nerd out for a couple of hours with him, and he was just showing me samples out of the biology room under a microscope. And the big change for me was up in this top left corner, you see lichen. We've all seen that growing on trees, especially oak trees. Honey locust tends to have it a lot. And what he showed me was he had a little stick that he rinsed under the sink. We looked at it first, and it was really cool. Then he rinsed it under the sink, and we waited about 10 minutes and looked at it under the microscope again, and it came to life. I mean, all these little things stood up. It had these little red blooms, and it was like this whole little forest, just like this amazing biosphere that was just occurring. And I'm in my mind, all I'm thinking is how much firewood that I'm cutting at home, and this stuff is just there, and I've just taken it for granted. I've overlooked it every time. I'm throwing it in the wood stove. And so Henley would go with me to cut wood after that, and he would come home with pockets full of all these cool lichen samples that he found. And I had the microscope at home, so we're in our dining room looking at lichen and rinsing it and waiting and looking at it again, and it was just great, because I made a promise to my family from the very beginning that yes, I was going to be extremely busy for a few years trying to get this degree, but I wanted to keep them as a part of it. So it was a great way to spend time with my son. So these were some inspirational images. I should also mention, as part of my creative process, what I would do is I would take all the images that I found, all the sketches that I had, and I would just jam them in this 3-ring binder. And because anyone who knows me, I'm all over the place. Like, I have 15 experiments going on at the same time, and they're not all related, and they rarely are. So when it was time for me to create something for my actual graduate work, I would open this binder and I would give myself like 20 minutes to just flip through all these inspirational images. And they could be, there was no rhyme or reason. It wasn't like I had fungus and coral and amoebas and bacteria. They were just, as I got them, I just shoved them in. So I would just flip through and just oversaturate my imagination. Then I would put the binder away and I would wedge the clay, and it would, kind of get me in the right mindset to work with the clay, and I'd just start sculpting. And whatever grew from it was totally pure that way, however my brain digested the inspiration. And I felt like the work got better after that. I wasn't trying to just make that 5-pound scabies mite anymore. I was making something fresh and new. And that was the turning point for me. Here's those images. So these were some of the early glaze experiments. I was like throwing and cutting these little pieces at the wheel so that I could dip them and find out, and meticulously logging everything. And then a student showed me, like, just take a piece of clay, squeeze it in your hand, and slap it on the table, and you get the perfect tester. And I was like, oh, duh. So then that changed the shape of the testers and gave me more time to actually experiment with glazes. This glaze is huge. This was the first step for my monster glaze. If you toured the gallery and you saw the lava glaze, magma glaze, whatever you want to call it, where it stretches and it's sinewy, this was the first experiment where I was playing with some chemicals and I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and I was so excited about this. And I submitted this in my graduate research, and Linda Ganstrom, my professor, she's like, these look like cat turds. She's like, this is dumb. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a good listener, and so I just kept going with it. But that was the aha moment, believe it or not, that led to that and that. But that was it. It was baby steps, just learning the materials. So here's the Viridi Corallium Favum. If you haven't figured it out, every piece is in Latin. The naming process is kind of funny. Since they're specimens, I wanted that play on words of like the Latin genus and species, and I included my family with that. Early on, I would go to Henley and be like, what does this look like to you? And if he was like, it kind of looks like fingers. And I'm like, okay, let's translate this. And like digitus, fingers, if you haven't found that piece yet. This is green honeycomb coral. And I'm not sure, I don't remember the progression for that one. Sometimes he would have an idea and we would type it in and it was like, ooh, we're not doing that one. That's way off. So either way, we just had fun with the titles when we were naming the pieces. If you're using Google Translate walking through the gallery, don't trust it. Google Translate does not translate Latin well at all. A student figured that out today. This one's happy fungus. And that piece, of course, isn't here. But this was definitely thesis work. I was playing with clay and glaze and wood and making like my own synthetic lichen with rubbers and fibers and paint and all sorts of stuff. But that one sold. This one is right in the middle. Everyone saw that one, I'm sure. you can tell as my work progressed, I started incorporating more media. When I felt like I had an idea and the clay was limiting me, I just had to reach out further. So that pod's the beginning, that pod's the next step, and then if you just kind of work your way around and back to the center, that's basically the thesis work. Oh, and Alcyonium, that's the very last one. And I can't remember what this one was, and I tried to find the translation, and of course Google's got it all wrong. Oh, it's a, hold on, I do remember. It's a sea, not a mollusk, but some sort of a sea creature. But anyway, a lot of it is inspired by sea life, and I did get some negative feedback that I live in Kansas and I'm landlocked. Why am I making specimens inspired by sea life? And my answer to that was to just take a trip over to the Sternberg at Hays. And during the Permian era, this was all underwater, and you can see the specimens there. And I feel like this has that same feel. They're specimens. So that's it. That's the slideshow. Thanks for being here. Does anyone have questions? Yeah, the stranger in the back.
I was just wondering, so it's hard to see what parts you've thrown on the pot. So I'm a potter, and so I look at how you constructed these. And so all these little fingers, are all those thrown or hand-built?
Yes and no. Oh. It depended on how much time I had and how bad my tendons were hurting. And so it is interesting. On some of the pieces, they were thrown. On some of the pieces, only a few of them are thrown. There were so many factors. You know this well as a ceramic artist. Sometimes it's just not working. You know, I'm at the wheel and I'm trying to throw all these little tubes, and it takes forever. A lot of the sculptures, like the Digitus one that's there, I remember when I started that piece and I filled like this huge wearboard with all these little stems that I was throwing at the wheel, and I was like, that's more than enough. And I started, and I got like an 8-inch area covered. And I'm like, I hate this. And then I also, you know, it just depends on the clay. I was using a lot of clay that we were just mixing in the studio, and sometimes it throws better, sometimes it hand builds better. Sometimes I've got one day to finish a piece, and so it's roll a coil and stick a rod through and roll that. Then obviously, you know, the more you do the same thing over and over, the better you get at it. So there is a total combination. Some of this work is thrown, some of it's hand built. There is literally pinch, coil, slab, and wheel throwing, and in some pieces incorporated into all of them. And, you know, I feel like I should give some credit to an artist that I know that showed us how to incorporate all of those things into one piece. Right, Carol? You did all right.
When choosing your colors, how do you find the right color?
When walking through the gallery, what do you think my favorite color is?
Blue.
So when choosing the colors, I'll be really honest. With all the glaze tests, I wanted the most sickly colors. I love a color that when you look at the sculpture, you're like, that's beautiful, but I feel like if I touch that, I'm gonna die. That's my color scheme. Like, that's the whole palette. Like, don't lick that. That's how my friend Danny died. Does that answer your question?
I understand. I like black and white.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yeah, we were actually talking about that. Alyssa, I mentioned that, I think that was to you. Did I mention that green's my favorite color, but like I'm always in khakis and gray, and I rarely wear bright colors. But when I make my work, huh?
Really bright oranges.
Yeah, but I mean, where does bright orange exist in nature? Like, I think of the poison dart frogs. Don't lick that. You know? If you're walking in a field and you see a mushroom growing and it's bright orange, are you gonna touch that? You gonna stick it in your mouth? No. I mean, well, you might, but only once. That was a good question, though. Anyone else?
For your pieces that are hanging, so that's just like clay with like different types of techniques and glaze?
Yes and no. So the smaller ones are sculptures made of ceramic. If you're talking about the big, the huge ones, those are foam.
Okay.
I could have made those in clay, but an important part of the process is understanding the limitations, and those would have weighed like 400 pounds, and my kiln's not big enough, and I'm not strong enough to put something like that into the kiln, and then they would just rip apart. I actually explored the possibilities of making small ones that would fit together, and they're actually foam and paint.
Just all foam and any clay?
There's no clay in any of those. They're wood, foam, paint. I've got all sorts of other materials that I use to, wire and steel to make armatures to hold it in place and get it where I need it to go.
Very cool.
Thank you. Also, in my sculpture courses, I was not allowed to use clay. So I was taking ceramics, and I was a ceramics major, and so with the graduate program, you're required to take 13 additional hours of other graduate level art. So I was taking all sculpture because I'm a 3D guy, and I started with that bug over there, the scabies mite, and got some bad blowback that, hey, that's clay, that should have been for your ceramics class. You need to do something else. And so you don't get to see a lot of those because a lot of the sculptures that I made early on didn't really fit in this realm. I did like this prehistoric fish in bronze that's super cool. One time we were in the woods, and I found where a farmer was dumping all of his dead cows through the decades, and I brought home feed sacks. Poor Bambi. I brought home feed sacks of cow bones. They weren't Jerry's cows, so if anyone's thinking that. And then I was drilling, like I had to get a respirator because I was drilling holes in these bones and then assembling stuff with rebar shoved through and welding and holding, and they were really cool, but they don't fit this show at all. So yeah, foam, that's your answer.
That's what it looks like. I was just curious.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Well, it's good. I like when, I actually prefer artwork that you question what the material is. I want you to get up in there and lean in close and ask to touch the artwork. In most cases, I'm okay with it, but I don't know if Alyssa's okay with it. Yeah.
You gotta be really careful if he's okay with it.
Yeah, be super careful.
So on those same pieces, the long pieces that are hanging down, since you said you use wire, are those like movable or would they break off?
Yeah, when we're done here, we'll walk over and I'll give one a little kick for you.
Because it depends on what part of those.
Yeah, it depends on what part. Some of them are movable, some of them not so much. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'll be here till it closes. If you have questions, come find me. Thank you.